Hello YouTubers! I will be going through this week's games, review last week's tips and leaderboard of our footy tip comp, and also go through my Brownlow Votes for season 2025. The top 5 of the 2025 AFL Brownlow Votes after round 8 are: in top spot with 16 votes is B. Smith, Geelong. What a recruit from the Doggies. In second spot with 13 votes is Z. Merritt, Essendon. In third spot with 3 players tied on 11 votes are N. Dacos, Collingwood, Tom Green, GWS Giants, and A. Brayshaw, Fremantle. These are my top 3 for the 2025 Brownlow medal count after round 8. Let's look at my tips for round 8. Just looking at this tipping scoreboard, there's an error. GWS Giants lost to Sydney Swans. Therefore, in looking at this tipping, I got 2 incorrect, and for round 8, I got 7 out of 9 correct. Let's see the total scoreboard for the Talking Effing AFL comp. Alright, in equal top spot, you got me, Talking Effing AFL, and Patrick L32, both on 46 votes respectively. And in third spot, we got Potter 1 with 45, and in fourth spot, I Am Hacks is on 44 votes. Let's see who I tip for round 9 of the 2025 AFL season. Alright, come on, yeah. Before we continue, I would like to ask for a very small favour. If you enjoy this AFL content, please take a sec to subscribe to the channel and like the video. That would be awesome. Okay, let's return back to the show. The first game of the week is played on a Thursday night between Fremantle Dockers and Collingwood Magpies. Fremantle was very disappointed last week and lost to St Kilda by 61 points on a Friday night, and Collingwood lost to Geelong in a 3-point thriller. The players in the mix for Fremantle are Erasmus and both Ross and Banford from suspension. For the Magpies, their players in the mix are Allen, Sullivan and Markov. The players injured for the Dockers are Walters, Fife, Jones, O'Driscoll, O'Meara, Sturt, Walker. So many players injured, and now Hayden Young is injured from last week's game. For the Maggies, Harrison, Johnson, McRae, McGuinness, McStay and Mitchell are out. Where the game will be won at? It's the midfield of both sides. For the ruck midfield set of Fremantle, you got Darcy, Sarong, Brayshaw, Johnson, Sharp. Now you're missing Hayden Young. For the Maggies, you got Darcy Cameron and ruck with Nick Dacos, Long, side bottom, Cripps, Lipinski, and also you can rotate players like Pendlebury and DeGoey in the middle. Just looking at the two teams' midfield, Collingwood has a lot of class. I expect them to win a lot of clearances and contested possessions, and therefore I expect Collingwood to kick more goals than Fremantle, and I'm going to tip Collingwood to beat Fremantle by 15 points. The next game, played on a Friday night, is between St Kilda Saints and Carlton. St Kilda had a magnificent win where they smashed Fremantle by 61 points, whereas the Blues were disappointing against Adelaide Crows where they lost by 10 goals, 60 points. The players in the mix for the Saints are Philippou, Wood, Henry and Boyd. For the Blues, their players in the mix are Evans, Pitnop and Binns. The players injured for the Saints are Butler, Cordy, Dow, King, Sard and Taru. For the Blues, they'll be missing Sincotta, Fantasia, Kemp, Newman, Savani, Jagger Smith and Zach Williams. Where the game will be won at, it's the ruck midfield set for both sides. For St Kilda, you got Marshall and ruck with McRae, Steele, Sinclair, Hill and Wood. Good balance. For the Blues, you got De Koning and ruck with Walsh, Schuer, P. Cripps, E. Holland and Ollie Hollands. Just looking at it, Carlton has more inside mids, whereas the Saints got the balance of inside, and you got Hill outside and Sinclair's elite kicking, and also Mason Wood gone outside and run to the wing. Just looking at last week's performance, the Saints absolutely beat Fremantle by 10 goals plus, whereas Carlton got annihilated by the Crows. And just based on the midfield, I expect the Saints to win more outside ball and clearances. Therefore, I'm going to tip the Saints to beat the Blues by 15 points. The next game of the week is between Melbourne Demons and the Hawthorn Hawks. Melbourne had a good win over West Coast, and Hawthorn did what they needed to do and beat Richmond. The players in the mix was Deezer, Van Rooyen, Larry and Howes. For the Hawks, their players in the mix are Eamon, Shrimshaw, Jay Sarong and Frost. The players injured for the Deezer, Hoare, Lever, McAdam, Moise Wakefield and now Petty to concussion. For the Hawks, their players injured are Day and Lewis. Where the game will be won at, it's the defense of Hawthorn or Melbourne's forward line. For the D's, up forward you have Forstrup, Melksham, Turner, Cosy Pickett, Spargo. Now Petty will be injured and I assume that will be Van Rooyen. For the Hawks, in defense you have Battle, Impey, D'Ambrosi, Sicily, Reddle and Barras. And just looking at the key or the Hawthorn defenders, they got so much quality. I can't see the Demons kicking 10 goals, and therefore I'm going to tip the Hawks to beat the D's by 25 points. The next game is between Essendon Bombers and Sydney Swans. The Bombers had a close 3-point win against North Melbourne Kangaroos, whereas Sydney beat the Giants in the Battle of the Bridge by 14 points. Good win to the Swans last week. The players in the mix for the Bombers are Davies, Haynes and El Harawi. For the Swans, their players in the mix are Hanley, Bauman and Laddams. The players injured for the Bombers are Bryan, Caldwell, Draper, Edwards, Parrish and now Harrison Jones. The players injured for the Swans are Adams, Amadi, Andrew, Cunningham, Totoi, Fox, Gordon, McDonald, Mules and Papley. So many players injured. Where the game will be won at, it's Essendon's forward line and Sydney's defense. In the forward line for the Bombers, you got Gresham, Hobbs, Martin, Kako, Wright, Langford. In defense for the Swans, you got Vicks, Blakey, Rampy, Roberts, McCartan and Melican. Just looking at the Swans defense, they still have so many experienced players like Melican, All-Australian Blakely and Dan Rampy. And just looking at Essendon's forward line, I can't forecast the Bombers to kick more than 12 goals, and I see they need to win by 18 points in this game. The next game is between Gold Coast Suns and Western Bulldogs, played at TIO Stadium in the Northern Territory. The players in the mix for the Suns are Closey, Moyle and Fiorini, who had 46 disposals last week in the VFL. For the Bulldogs, their players in the mix are Hines, Doolan and Duray. The players injured for the Suns are Ballard, Berry, Lombard. That's a pretty small injury list. Suns are doing pretty well off field as well. For the Doggies, they'll be missing Darcy, Garcia, Waitman. Where the game will be won at, it's the full line of the Doggies or the Suns defense. In defense for the Suns, you got Powell, Collins, Ulan, Rioli, Andrew, Noble. For the Western Bulldogs, you got Treloar, Norton, West, Kendi, Cameras and Harms. Just looking at the Western Bulldogs full line, they've got mainly just the one marking forward, Norton. I can see the halfback players of John Noble and Rioli providing a lot of run off halfback and setting a lot of counter-attacking for the Gold Coast Suns. Given that it's going to be a humid day in Northern Territory, the Gold Coast Suns are used to living in that weather condition. Therefore, I'm going to tip the Suns to win by 21 points. The next game on Saturday night is the magnificent showdown between Port Adelaide Power and the Adelaide Crows. The Power, very disappointing last week, got annihilated by the Western Bulldogs by 90 points. What a win by the Doggies. And the Crows did their business over Carlton and beat them by 60 points, or 10 goals as you say. The players in the mix for the Power are Moraz, Atkins against his former side, Burton and Sin from a concussion. For the Crows, their players in the mix are Hinge back from suspension, Pedler, Draper, Cook and Murphy. The players injured for the Power are Lyle, Crockham, Lukosius, Marshall. For the Crows, their players injured are the two Murray brothers and Strawn. Where the game will be won at, it's off-field. During the lead up to the showdown, Port Adelaide Power will be significantly crashing in the media with a 9-point thrashing from the Western Bulldogs. And I'm going to tip an upset and tip the Power to beat the Crows, just due to the fact that the Power are going to be getting the bad press this week for their terrible game against the Doggies, whereas the Crows are in positive mode where they're beating Blues by 60 points. And in showdown, it doesn't matter who's a favourite, either team can win, and that's why I'm going to tip a Power in an upset against the Adelaide Crows. The next game is between Richmond Tigers and West Coast Eagles played on the Sunday lunchtime at the MCG. Last week, the Tigers lost to the Hawks and the Eagles lost at home to the Demons. The players in the mix for the Tigers are Gray, Brewer and Sonsi. For the Eagles, their players in the mix are Williams, Ross and Davis. The players injured for the Tigers are Armstrong, Gipkus, Hawthorn, Lafu, Preston, Ryan and Young. For the Eagles, they'll be missing Chester, Sheed, Yo, Gimby, McGovern to concussion, big blow, and Archer Reid. Where the game will be won at, it's Richmond's defense and West Coast forward line. In defense for the Tigers, you got Miller, Walter, Wallstein, Shaw, Brown, Broad. For the Eagles in the forward line, you got Cripps, Williams, Ryan, Owies, Warman, and Graham against his old side. Just looking at that, Richmond have a significant amount of experienced players in the defense, and I can't see West Coast Eagles kicking more than 12 goals. And also up forward for the Tigers, you got Tom Lynch and McGovern will be out to concussion. So that means someone like Oscar Allen will have to play on Tom Lynch. And I can see Richmond kicking more goals than West Coast Eagles. And I predict the Tigers to beat the West Coast Eagles by 17 points at the MCG. The next game, played on a Sunday afternoon, is between Geelong Cats and GWS Giants. Geelong had a magnificent 3-point win over Collingwood, while the Cats were trailing at 3/4 time and made a comeback. The Swans beat the Giants last week and the Giants lost by 14 points in their Battle of the Bridge derby. The players in the mix for the Cats are Myers, Closely and Kolatsky. For the Giants, their players in the mix are Kuzetski, Angrove and Alia. The players injured for the Cats are Braun, Burt, Conroy, Edwards, Guthrie, Henry, Hoffman, Kebner and Jack Martin. And now we can add Stanley to a hamstring. For the Giants, they'll be missing Daniels, Hannaford and Logan Smith. Where the game will be won at, it's the midfield. The ruck midfield set up Geelong. You got Blickhouse in ruck with Smith, Atkins, Clark, Holmes and Mullen. For the Giants, you got Briggs, Bedford, Tom Green, Ward, Callahan and Ware. And just looking at the midfield Geelong, they've got players with more run, Bailey Smith and Holmes, and I expect Geelong to win more contested possession and provide enough outside ball and let Holmes and your Smith run and pass the ball forward inside 50. And also Dangerfield can play a bit in the centre bounce attendance, and therefore the Cats will have enough inside 50 where Dangerfield, Jeremy Cameron, Stengel and Close will have opportunities to kick many goals. And I'm going to tip Geelong to beat the Giants by 15 points, even though the Giants have a good record at GMHBA Stadium, but I'm still sticking to Geelong. The last game of the week is between North Melbourne Kangaroos and Brisbane Lions. The players in the mix for the Kangaroos are Core, Tucker and Hanson Jr. The players in the mix for the Lions are Dodo, Tunsil and Darcy Ford. The players injured for the Kangaroos are Coleman, Goda and Curtis is still suspended. For the Lions, their players injured are McCarthy, Baril, Smith and Starcevich. Just looking at the two teams, North Melbourne are still in the rebuilding stage. They've done this for a number of years now, whereas the Lions are in win now mode, premiership mode contention. And just look at the two teams roster, like North Melbourne, they've got 10 players that's played less than 50 games compared to the Lions 4. The Lions have 5 players over 200 games of experience compared to the Kangaroos of 4. But the big stat is the players that played 150 to 200 games. The Kangaroos only have 1 player, whereas the Lions have 8 players that fit into the 150 to 200 game category. They got so much experience, and due to the Lions having experience last year's premiers, I'm going to tip the Lions to beat the Kangaroos by 42 points. They're my tips for round 9 of the 2025 AFL season. I tip the Maggies to beat Freo, Saints to beat the Blues, Hawthorn and Sydney to win their away games, the Suns to beat the Bulldogs in Northern Territory, the Power to cause an upset in the showdown, the Tigers to beat the Eagles, the Cats to beat the Giants at home, and the Lions to beat North Melbourne in Tasmania. Thank you for watching my video, and it will be appreciated if you can subscribe and comment to my videos. Hopefully you enjoyed my video, and see you next time. Cheers or bye.